Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. This is John Curtin. I'm an engineer here in the air construction group, DNR. And there's four of us who are actually going to put on this presentation this afternoon. We've got a lot of experience here. In Easy Air, we've got Michael Hermsen, who's a senior engineer. Dan Yanzulik, who just spoke there, is an engineer also here in the group. And then finally, Ashley Dvorak will also be giving a presentation. So I think among the four of us, we should be able to do a pretty good job here. We know that your levels of interest and ability with Easy Air probably vary. Some of you may actually have been in the system quite a bit already, and some of you may be brand new. So again, don't feel shy about asking any questions. Easy questions, Mike and I will handle, and then the hard questions we'll let Daniel and Ashley take. This is the first time we've used Zoom for a presentation like this, so we're kind of excited to see how that'll work, and I think there's a lot of good features to it that'll make it better for us. If I can get my PowerPoint to advance, which I just did, I just want to give you a quick overview what we're going to be talking about. First thing I'm going to show you is basically what your dashboard is going to look like and some of the features once you get into Easy Air. Explain that, just give you sort of an overview. Then Michael is going to go through step by step how to apply for a standard air construction permit. And this is kind of the meat of the whole afternoon. So he'll be spending about an hour going through that. And we'll cover every form that you'll need to deal with and go through a really good explanation of that. We also have some tips that we're going to throw in at the end of Mike's presentation. Some of the things that we've encountered over the, what is it now, maybe 13 months that we've been using the system. We all have experience in entering applications ourselves, so we can sort of stand in your shoes a little bit and try to understand where you're coming from. After that, after a break, we'll have some brief discussions on various topics that are related to air construction permitting. Like, how do you modify an application? How do you withdraw an application? We have things like determination requests, so we'll explain how to use Easy Air to do that. As some of you know, there's a group of construction permits that are for specific industrial categories. We call those the permit templates. We will go through one of those and show you how that works in Easy Air. We'll talk about amending an application, and what we mean by that is when we need additional information or if the application's incomplete. We'll show you how that works in Easy Air. And then the last three topics really deal with some things that kind of happen outside of permitting, but are related to permitting. So there, for example, there's notification forms that are required once a permit is issued. When you withdraw equipment, you can rescind the permit using Easy Air. You can remove equipment from the Easy Air tables through a deactivation process. And finally, Ashley will explain how to search for permits using Easy Air. So that's just basically an overview of this afternoon's presentation. Okay, now I'm going to go to Easy Air itself, and we'll get into the actual looking at the Easy Air screen. So if you give me a minute to do that, I will work my way over. So when you first make your first attempt to get into Easy Air, you're going to be faced with this screen. And like any electronic application system, you have to have an account and you have to sort of go through some security questions and things like that. And again, probably some of you know how to do this, but if you are totally new to Easy Air, this is actually the very first step. So there's a lot of information on this screen that you would want to go through, and you want to make sure that you can get an account, that you go through the steps for creating a new account, We actually had a webinar yesterday where Kevin Conley would have explained how to do that, so maybe some of you attended that. But at some point, before you start using Easy Air, you're going to have to register for it. And so again, I would encourage you to review these steps here if you haven't gotten to that point yet. And the really good thing about our system here is we have two very experienced people. Their names are Kevin Conley and Jason Dowie, who can help you get an account, get you set up. There's an email address down here that you can always send them emails to right here, easyair@dnr.iowa.gov. So you should take advantage of that. The administrator for Easy Air are people who work for the Air Quality Bureau. They're not people who are in New Jersey. So they will be able to figure out, who you are and get you all registered. After you get registered, we're going to log in, and now I'm going to show you what the dashboard is going to look like. So when you get into Easy Air, the first thing you're going to see is this dashboard. And there's four main areas. Up here in the top left corner is where you can start a new submittal. And we're going to go through all of these things in greater detail. Down here in the left towards the bottom, Message Center. The Easy Air system has email capability. It can send you emails, for example, when you submit an application or when a fee is due or when a permit gets issued. So you will get some emails through the system and you can find them here. There's other places where you can find them for specific projects, which we will show you. Up here, sort of in the middle, upcoming submittal obligations. This is going to be something where maybe you're required to submit one of those notification forms after a permit gets issued, and you're supposed to do it after a certain period of time. So you may start getting some reminders here that you have some obligations. Construction permits don't expire, so we really don't, you don't have to worry about renewing them. But if you're a Title V facility, probably is going to be a different story. And then finally here, this section, permit licenses, this is where you'll see a list of your permits that actually get issued to you once things get into Easy Air and we start issuing permits through Easy Air. So if you notice up here, we have three main tabs: My Dashboard, which I just explained briefly, the Submittal tab, and then the My Account tab. You're primarily going to be working off of the Submittal tab when you're doing applications, okay? And when you look at the Submittal tab, there's actually 6 actions that are within that tab. Start New Submittal. I'm going to click on that one, and then I'm going to give you an overview of the different options you have when you're trying to use Easy Air to apply for a construction permit. So I'm going to click on that. And now I have a screen over here that shows you the 11 different types of permit options that you have. So not going in any order here, I'm just going to point out your main focus. And today, again, the main focus will be construction standard application. So this is where you would begin if you were applying for just a regular construction permit. But we also have 5 general permit options. And again, if you're in specific industrial categories or businesses, you probably know about this. So we've carried this into Easy Air. We have these general permit options for aggregate processing plants, bulk gasoline plants, concrete batch plants, Group 2 grain elevators, and hot mix asphalt plants. So again, this is consistent with the way we've been doing paper applications for the last 15 years, okay? One thing to keep in mind is that our paper applications have been revised. They're still available. We want you to use Easy Air, but they're still available. But they've all been updated to kind of match Easy Air. So Easy Air and the paper are going to be asking you the same questions and requiring the same information. We also have a couple of registration type permits. Group 1 grain elevators are for smaller grain elevators. That's a registration type permit. We also have the paint booth permit by rule. This is a registration type permit for facilities that use either less than 1 gallon or 3 gallons of paint a day. Down on the bottom row here, we have some things, besides the standard application, we have some things that aren't really, well, 2 of them aren't really permit applications, but they're ways that we can communicate with you for other reasons. So the first one here is construction determination. And we actually get a lot of these. These would be letters that we get in where somebody's asking us a question about maybe a rule applicability or an interpretation of a rule, or does a permit need to be modified for a certain reason? So you can use Easy Air to request us to make a determination and then send you back something in writing. Plant-wide applicability limitations. This is a special type of permit that's available for PSD major sources, where you're taking a sort of a plant-wide limit on a specific criteria air pollutant. Construction pre-applications are used for PSD projects, or they can be used for other facilities where perhaps before an application is submitted, we need to iron out some issues, maybe about dispersion modeling or single source determination. So this would be an application that you would submit to us before you actually submitted your application for a standard permit. So that's not used that often, but it can be used. Okay, so that's the overview of the different permit types. Now, there's some icons underneath these different buttons. The little eye icon, if you can see that on your screen, is just telling you what type of permit it is. The little heart is basically a way for you to designate your favorite type of application, if you have a favorite. The Adobe icon is going to give you some general information about how to fill out the form. This question mark button, I believe, will do the same thing. So this, the question mark button is giving you information about the form. You see how that just pops up there? So that's the question mark. It gives you sort of general information, general direction. We'll talk about getting more specific information as we walk through the forms, or you can rely on the paper copy. There's directions on the back of all our paper copy that's consistent with Easy Air. Okay, so you have start new submittals. If you create favorites, then you will find them within the My Favorites. You'll be saving them there. And if you want to just keep them there for whatever reason, there you go. Okay, the next one I want to just give you an overview on is edit pending submittals. So as we all know, when you're working on applications, the phone will ring and you'll get pulled away, or you'll have to, go on vacation or take a break. So when you start an application and save it, and that's the important thing, to save it, it will be saved in the system, and then you can go back and you can work on it. All right, so as long as you save it, it'll be there for you to go back. We'll talk about this number here. This is called the submittal ID number, but that's going to be a way you'll be able to search. If you know your submittal ID number of your application, you'll be able to do a search up here, and that will help you find, if you're working on a bunch of different projects, it'll help you find the one that you want to get back to. And then you will be able to click on this icon here, and then that will open up the application, and then you'll be able to go back and start working on it again. Okay, so edit pending submittals are for things that you have not submitted to us. We don't know anything about them. Okay, so we can't see these until you submit them. Okay, down here at the bottom, we have 3 areas. The first one is track submissions. Okay, so once you make your submittal and it makes its way to us, and Easy Air is open 24/7, so you can do this in the middle of the night and it'll come in, and when we get to work the next morning, it'll get logged in. We'll assign it a project number, our regular project number, which I highlight over here, and then it'll eventually get assigned to an engineer. So this is a place where, again, if you know your submittal ID number, you'll be able to go in and you'll be able to find information about the application you submitted. Now, Mike will show you as you actually make your application, you're going to get a receipt from the system and an email from the system. So if you submit in the middle of the night, you're going to get an email back from the system right when you do it, if it's a good application. But then eventually we'll start tracking it and working on it. So I'll just show you that real quickly. We'll hit this view button. There's things here that you can get information on. You could actually go back and look at your application that you submitted. If you had attached some other material, you could find that there. The payment, if you owe any money, or if you've paid, it'll show up there, okay? Work activities is kind of an interesting. So this is where in Easy Air, there's a set of tasks that are laid out that as we work through the application after we get it from you, we have to complete. So this will kind of give you an idea of where things are at. And if you don't see any progress, you could just, you'll find the engineer's name, you'll be able to contact the engineer and say, can you tell me, please update me on the status of the permit. I don't see any activity in Easy Air. And then the last thing is there's this email history. And again, Easy Air will send emails through the system to you for significant activities like receiving an application or paying a fee, or if a fee is due, or when a permit gets issued. But keep in mind that you'll also be getting emails from the DNR staff who are working on your application. So if we need to get additional information about the application, that will be coming from our Google account, our regular email, sending that to you so that we can keep working on the project. Okay, then we have manage permits and certificates. And really, this is again a place where you could go after the permit gets issued, and you will be able to find a copy of the permit here. This would be one place, and we'll explain briefly how you can use this section when you need to modify a permit that's been issued in Easy Air. So there'll be a way for you to do that. And then finally, the last thing here is email history, which again, you can do searches for your submittal ID or for any period of time. This isn't probably the easiest way to do that, but it is another way to see if the system has been sending you emails. Okay, so my dashboard is kind of the big picture dashboard view of things. You can also, when you're looking to apply for an application, you can click on this button, or you can click on the tab and start a new submittal. It'll take you to the same place. Okay.
John, can you search by emission unit number in like manage permit?
No,
section?
I don't believe when you're in this manage permit section, what this is this is going to be through permits that we have issued. Okay, so like, for example, here's one that's been issued, and this would be the application. So you would have to know what was in that application. Okay, so if you knew what was in that application, it would bring that application up, and then there's a way for you to copy that application if you needed to modify it. I don't know if that was part of your question, but Michael will talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about that. Yep, we're going to get into that. That's a good question. Okay, and then the last thing I want to give you here is part of the overview is the My Account. And this is where Kevin yesterday would have spent a lot of time explaining to you how, when you get registered in Easy Air, just like when you get registered for any application system online, you can manage your account. You can do things like changing your password. You can, give us change information about, addresses. So keep that in mind. I believe Michael will talk about this, is that when you are working in Easy Air, if you're responsible for several facilities, you need to be associated with each one of those facilities. In other words, if you're a company that has 10 sites in Iowa, you're the responsible person, or you're going to be a permit preparer, you need to be associated with each and every one of those sites. Don't just assume that because you're associated with one, that's going to give you rights to go in and work on all of them. You need to be associated with any facility that you're going to be working on, whether you're a preparer or a responsible official. Responsible official is the person who's actually submitting the application, and preparers then just prepare. They're like consultants. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through this, but I just want to make you aware that there is this section where, we've got basic information, we've got doing things with your password, there's a security question procedure that you have to follow, and this is important when you're submitting an application. There's going to be some security questions asked, and then you can also assign other people who have Easy Air accounts to be like a preparer. So I've assigned Michael I'm the responsible official for this account, but Michael could come in and he could work on the applications because I've assigned him that level of duty, but I would be the one who would have to submit. Okay, I believe that's all I want to say here as far as the overview. So I think I'm ready to turn it over to Michael, and we will then get into the actual heart of the presentation here. Okay, Mike,
Okay, thanks, John.
Yep.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right, yeah. Hello, this is Michael Hermson with the construction permitting section. And now that John has given you a tour of the dashboard and showing you some of the system capabilities, I'm going to walk you through how to complete a standard construction permit application. So to do this, we're just going to go through a basic process. Consists of one emission unit, one control device emitting through one stack, and that's right here. It's going to be a green receiving unit that's controlled by a bag house and emits through one stack. So we're going to go through the process, fill out the application for you, show you how to do that, but we're not going to submit it. And then I'm going to show you how to come back to the application, add a unit, and then we'll go through the submission process. So that process will look like this. We'll be adding a hammer mill to it. Okay, so to get started, you can do that a couple of ways. You can click on the apply for a new submittal button, or you can go under your submittal tab, like John mentioned, and click on start a new submittal. And that'll bring up all the different application types that John went through. And what you want to do is click on the construction standard application and just click start. And that's going to bring up your application. So before we get started, I wanted to go through a couple things. You'll notice on the left-hand side here, we have a wizard panel. So that's going to guide you through the process, and that consists of 5 steps. You'll put your information into your forms, then you'll include any attachments in step 2. Step 3 is going to be an overall validation of the application, make sure that everything that is required you've included, and then you can make your payment and then finally submit the application to us. You can use the system. We kind of recommend just going through it page by page by using the next button here, and that's going to guide you through the system, and it's going to perform a validation on each step or each form. So it'll make sure as you go to the next one that you've included all the information, so you don't get to the end in step 3 and figure out you've left out a lot of stuff. So that'll kind of remind you as you go through the process. If you do forget something, it will be caught in step 3 though. And you can go ahead and skip ahead to different forms. but in that case, it's not going to perform the validation. It also won't save your information. So if you do want to jump ahead to another form, make sure you save it first. So that'll be one of the constant themes, is to make sure you save your work. But if you use the next button or previous button, it should save your information, but it's a good idea to save as much as possible. Another thing we wanted to mention is that we're not requiring any new information with the new Easy Air application system. This is all information that was in our former, our current two paper application. So it's the same information in both. So you just have to make sure you include everything on the Easy Air side. Another thing you want to make sure, like John said, is to write down your submittal number. And that's located right here. So as you get started, you might want to jot that down and use that number to search for your application in the future if you need to reference it at any point. Okay, so that gets us to the first form, which is the facility information form. And on this form, you're just going to provide basic information about the project and really your facility. So, and you'll also notice that a number of these fields have red stars, and those are the fields that you're going to have to include. Those are required. So we would ask that you fill out all those fields. I think it helps us. We don't have to come back and ask later, but definitely the ones that are starred, you're at least going to have to provide information for those for the validation to pass. Okay, so to get started, the first question is, what's the reason for the application? Do you have a new unit that hasn't been yet constructed? Does it need a new permit, but it's already construction? Maybe it was under an exemption, or you just didn't get a permit for it. Is it a modification to an existing unit with a permit? Do you want to ask for a determination? You can rescind a permit, and you can also indicate whether this is a PSD project. So in our example, we're just going to add a new unit, so I'll click on that. If you did have a project where you were doing a new unit and a modification, you would just go ahead and click on both of them. Okay, and then the second question just asks you to put in your facility. So that'll be provided in this drop-down box. And so you just click on that, and basic information for your facility will fill in the facility address and facility number. Now, if your facility isn't listed in this drop-down box, that could be for a couple of reasons. The first reason being that maybe your facility isn't in our system yet. It's not in our records. It's not in Easy Air. So you'll have to apply for a facility number. And you can do that by using this form. It's the facility number and name change form, and this is located on our website. So you just go ahead and fill out this form. There's 12 questions. You just include all that information. There's pretty good instructions here you could follow. And if you have any questions, you can always call us too. And then once you get that done, you want to email it to us. We'll get you in the system, give you a facility number, and then we'll email that back to you. And then your facility will be in the system. The second reason is that maybe you haven't, the facility is in the system, but you haven't associated yourself with your facility. And you're going to do that by going under My Account and go to Basic Information. Okay, and then you want to go under the Associate Facilities tab that John showed you earlier. And like John said, Kevin Conley went through this in depth yesterday, and we'll have a recording of that presentation on our website. So if you need any help with that, you could get through that. You can give us a call, but I'll go through the basic process of doing that. So what you want to do is go under that tab, and you won't be listed here, so you have to click on Associate Facility. And then you're going to search for your facility's name, and then that's going to bring that facility up. So another resource you can use is this account registration instruction for responsible officials. And it also applies to preparers, but this is also on our website, and it pretty much covers what Kevin's presentation went through. So you can use this. And I'm going to assume here that you've already created an account for yourself, but this document does go through that too. So you'll kind of scroll through that, make sure you have an account. And then once you get your account, there's a section for associating facilities. So like I said, the first thing you'll want to do is associate facility by clicking on that button, and then search for your facility. And then here's what you'll see. This table will come up, and then you click on your facility, and you also want to indicate what type of submissions you're going to make. So the list that would come up will be much longer. You'll have Title V applications, construction permit types. So you just click on all the ones you think you're going to use. You can click them all, or you can just narrow it down to the ones that you think you'll be using. So for like a standard construction permit application. And then once you get that clicked, you'll have to provide some security answers. This is just going to, so we can make sure it's you when you're submitting an application, but you will need this when you submit an application. So you want to make sure you jot down what your answers are to your question. And then you'll have a picture verification. And then you have to identify who you are. And you can do that by two methods. You can do it by the E-Verify or the ESA methods. So we recommend the E-Verify option. It's pretty quick. You just click on that button. You're going to see a few screens that you're going to scroll through, provide your information, and then you usually get that verification back pretty quick, almost immediately. So then you'll be good to go. We'll know it's you. But you can also do the ESA option. So you click on that button, and then you want to click on the print subscriber agreement. But you're gonna have to mail that in. Then we would go through it. Then we would send you something back, and then you'd be good to go. So that process takes a little longer. So that's kind of the process of associating yourself with your facility. Okay, getting back to the application. The other thing that might happen is that you might be associated with multiple facilities. So if you did have facilities throughout the state and you're managing them all, you just want to make sure you click on the correct one. And that should be pretty evident once you do click on it. The address will come up in the facility number, but we have it in a number of cases where people do have multiple facilities and they clicked on the wrong one, and that can just cause delays later. So you just want to make sure you're getting in the right facility. Okay, so like I said, it'll fill in some basic information for you. It would also indicate what your billing status is with us. And that's just what's currently in the system. So this comes up as a minor source. If you thought that was incorrect, you can change that. But I would suggest if you do think it's wrong, you give us a call first and we can look through that and kind of iron that out before the application is submitted. Again, that might cause delays down the line if one of us is wrong. So we'll just want to make sure you get that correct first. But what you currently are in the system will show up when you pull up the application. Okay, then you want to fill in your contact information. And then it'll ask for your phone number and your email and some other basic information. And then coming down here, it also asks the address for the actual equipment itself. If that's the same as a facility address, just go ahead and click on that button. Who do you want the permit mailed to? If that's the same as a facility contact, we have a button for that. And the same with the mailing address for the facility. So of course, if any of that information is different, you just go ahead and type that in and provide that information. Okay, then the application asks, do you want to review draft permits? Do you want to take a look at the permits before we actually issue them? So in this case, I would like to do that. So I'll click yes. Is equipment portable? In my case, it's a stationary source, so I'll say no. If it was portable, you click on yes, and then you want to make sure you have an attachment that shows where that portable equipment is going to be operating, whether that's on your facility or maybe throughout the state. So you just want to make sure you give an attachment which shows all the different locations it'll be operating. Okay, then it asks, will the application be prepared by a full-time employee? So if you're part of the company, you'd say yes. If you're having someone else fill it out for you, like a consultant, you would click on no. So if you do click no, then they would have to just go ahead and provide their information. And you want to make sure that they would include the PE signature document. So they'd just go ahead and sign this and use their seal. And you would attach that to the application when you submit it. So at this point, I'm going to kind of show you what happens if you don't fill out all the fields. When you're going through the application, the system will warn you. So you can kind of look through the form and they'll come up as red. So that'll kind of make it pretty obvious what you forgot. So you just go back and fill in that information. But in this case, I am a company employee, so I'm just going to correct that and move on to the next form.
Mike, before we go to the next form, we did get one question I think maybe you should address, and that's from Chadwick in the chat.
Okay.
If you want to take a look at that. And if not, I can just read it out to you.
Yeah, why don't you just read it out to me?
Sure. Chadwick asked, what is a PSD project? I think you had mentioned that when you were starting the facility information form, you mentioned PSD. Could you just explain briefly what a PSD project would be?
Yeah. So PSD projects are the larger projects. So you would have to be a major source for PSD. And then once that occurs, future applications that come in, you'd either limit out of the PSD review or you have to go through the actual review. So that's just for larger sources. So it's like a category. So those projects usually require a lot more information and a lot more steps to go through because they are large emitters. And so they're special projects. So we want to know up front if this is a PSD project. So. Okay, so now we'll move on to the second form, the cover page form. And here you're just going to give basic information about the project itself. So the first question is provide a description of the facility. You can either upload that if you have it written out somewhere else, or you can type it in right here. So in this case, you want to be, as descriptive as you can be about what your facility does, maybe the status of your facility, whether it's major or minor for different programs. If you do multiple things on site, just give a good description of what your facility does. Then it asks for the goals of the permit request. Again, you can either type that in or upload it. And here you're just going to want to go through what you're hoping to achieve with the permit request. So in this case, I'd be saying, I want to get a new permit for a new source. I want to establish limits to keep the source synthetic minor, and anything else you think that's important. Again, we ask for as much information as you can provide us so we don't have to come back to you later. So anything you think is important, you want to include in that description. Okay, would you like the DNR to issue the permits under a collection of air permits document, which is a CAP document? And that's a document where we can put a number of similar permits that have similar requirements into one document just to make it easier. So you can request that. In this case, I just have one permit, so I'm just going to click on no. And then it asks for the primary activity at your facility. This is a primary thing you do there. So, and you'll provide that by providing the SIC and NAICS code. And you'll notice here that we have small little question marks next to some fields. Those are called tooltips. And that's going to provide some information about what the field is and then maybe how you can fill it out. So in this case, it says what an SIC code is. And then we give a couple of websites where you can go to find your SIC code. So in this case, I know my SIC and NAICS code, so I included those. We also asked for a secondary activity. So if you had another activity at the facility you do, you could include that. So for example, here, this is a feed mill. That's their primary activity, but they might have a small grain elevator on site. So you can include that activity also. And then it asks you to identify any facilities within 5 miles of this permitted facility. So through our permit regulations, sometimes we have to include multiple facilities that are close to one another if they're related. So we just like to know any sources that are close just to go through that review to see if they should be considered one source or not. So if there are any, want to include that information there. The next question has to do with new source performance standards. So it's asking if any of the mission units would be subject to it. And we do provide a link here of the standards. So you could go through and determine if the mission units are subject to those standards. If they are, you just go ahead and click on yes. If you don't see any that apply or you just don't know, I would just go ahead and click on no. And then the same for the NESHAP standards. So we provide the links here. You could look through and see if anything applies. Again, if you don't know or you don't think that they apply, click on no. In this case, I know the facility is subject to NESHAP 7D, so I'll click yes. And then you could write that down here, just give a basic description of what you know about the standards applying to this emission unit. Okay, so we'll move on to the next form. Okay, and this is the mission point form. So you want to make sure you include a mission point form for each mission point in the project. So even if you're modifying a unit, but you're not changing the stack, you'll still want to make sure you include an emission point form for each one that's part of the project. And you'll see as you bring up this form, it's going to bring up all the emission points at your facility that are in the system. So if you did want to just do a modification to a unit, you could just click on include in submittal, and then you're going to want to click here just to make sure all the information is complete and correct. You could also use this feature to copy. So say you're putting in another boiler that's identical to the first boiler you have. So you could just click on the category or the row and then push copy emission point, and then you just give it a new ID, and then you want to go in there and make sure all the information is still correct again. But in this case, I'm going to add a new emission point. So I'm going to go down here and click on this button. And that's going to bring out the form. So you just go ahead and give it a unit ID. And then give it a name. In this case, it's grain receiving. I'm just going to abbreviate that to save time. Stack opening size is circular. It's 12 inches. It's 25 feet off the ground, and it's vertical and obstructed. So you want to make sure you include all that information. Then if you know the moisture content, you could include that. And then the exit temperature. In this case, this unit sits outside and it's only subject to ambient temperatures. So I can just go ahead and click on ambient. If it was located inside a building, you could use building and ambient. Those two are different. Or if the process has a specific temperature, you want to include what the temperature is at the stack, and you would just write that in. And then give the rated flow rate. You can do that in actual or standard cubic feet per minute.
So if there is no stack, you just hit the fugitive. If it just
you can, yep.
Okay.
Or so if there's all those different options you have there, or if it's indoor vented, you can include that information too. So
okay.
Okay, with all these pop-up forms, you want to make sure you save them before you close them. So you can't just put the information and close it. It won't save it for you. So just make sure you hit the save button. Okay, and then once you get it in the system, you're going to see the emission points that are part of this project are going to show up in red, and all the existing ones at the facility are black. So that's going to show you what's in this application. Another feature you can use is click on show only items included in the submittal or this project. And that's just going to narrow it down to what's in your project. So then you don't have to deal with all the other emission points you're not modifying in the project. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move to the next form. And this is a control equipment form. So again, you want to make sure you include a control equipment form for each piece of control equipment in the project. So again, if you're modifying a permit, but you're not touching the control equipment, you still have to just include that in the application.
Can you bypass this screen if there is no control equipment?
Yes. So if you didn't have any control equipment, I would just click on, just go to the next button, and then it just will leave that out for you.
Okay, I got hung up there on one that I'm working on right now.
Yeah, I've had that too. But yeah, it works. You just click next, and it'll assume there's no control equipment for that emission point. Okay, so again, it's going to bring up all the pieces of control equipment at the facility that's in easy air. And most of them should be there. And again, you have the same features. If you were modifying a unit, you just say include in submittal. And then, you want to view it to make sure it's still correct, or you don't need to change anything. If you have an identical one, you can click the row and then push copy. That'll save you some time. But in this case, again, I'm just adding a new piece of control equipment. So I'm going to click on that button, and then your form will come up again. So the first thing you want to do is indicate what device type it is. And we have some of the more common control devices here. These are also ones we currently have paper forms for. So you want to make sure that you click on the right one. It'll save you time. So if you click on catalytic oxidation, it's going to bring up information specific for catalytic oxidation. So it'll narrow it down to that field. In this case, I have a fabric filter. So there's a category for that. So I'm going to click on that. And then I want to give it a control ID. You would include the manufacturer model number, and then you want to just state when you think you're going to be installing this unit. If you're modifying an existing unit, then you just put the date that you think that modification is going to occur. It asks, is there a capture hood involved? So if there is, you just click on yes. And then you would give the percentage of the capture hood efficiency, which is just telling how much of the emissions are actually being caught and sent to the baghouse. So in this case, I don't have one, so I'll click on no. And then you indicate the type of control equipment. So it's got different sorts of fabric filters, and I have a baghouse. And then you want to indicate how you're going to monitor the equipment. So it gives you quite a few different options here. I'm going to click on pressure drop, and then it gives you a field for what the range is that you'll be monitoring and how often you're going to be doing that. So in this case, the baghouse is designed to operate between 2 and 4 inches of water column, and we're going to monitor that daily. You then want to indicate that you're going to enclose the manufacturer's data and engineering specifications. And then because pressure drop is pretty common to all baghouses, we do ask for that again. So if you indicated another thing here, we're going to ask for the pressure drop because it's pretty much common with all baghouses. Indicate the media type. And then if you know the filter face efficiency, you can include that too. Okay, so now we have all the information in the form for the control equipment. Now we got to say what pollutants is this control device controlling? And you do that by clicking on the Associate Control Pollutant button. And here it's going to give you different features to do a search. So if you wanted to search for all the pollutants, you could just click search, and it'll bring up all the different pollutants in the system. We also have a pollutant type. You have CAP, HAP, and others. So CAP is going to be criteria air pollutants. You click on those are all going to come up. You can also do a word or pollutant code search. So in this case, I'm just going to put PM for particulate matter and see what comes up. So yeah, all the different types of PM are going to come up. PM total, PM10, and PM 2.5. So I have all of those. I'm just going to click on those. So that's just saying that the baghouse is controlling these types of pollutants. And then also include the control efficiency. And I'm going to say that's 98%. Again, you want to make sure you save the form. And then you should see that show up in the table here. And that shows it's in the system. Okay, you also want to indicate which stack that the control device will be emitting through. And you do that by associate emission point. And then you'd search through there. And again, you're going to see the emission point that we just put into the system. You want to make sure you save that. Okay, and then make sure you save the form. So again, it's going to show you any errors that you made. And this is going to be a little different than our PowerPoint. I guess I used the wrong ID here. We'll see if B works. Okay. All right, now we can move on to the next form. And this is a mission unit form. And again, as I said with the other forms, you want to make sure you include a form for each mission unit in the project. And again, you'll see all the mission units at the facility that are in the system are going to show up. It has the same features again. If you want to modify a unit, just click include in submittal and check it. Again, you can copy a form. So if I'm putting in an identical boiler, it's going to save me some time just to copy what's already in the system. But in this case, I'm adding a new emission unit. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And the form pops up for that. Now, the first thing you're going to indicate is the emission unit type. So again, we have some of the more common emission unit types. Again, the ones we have paper forms for. So if you have any of these, such as cooling tower, boiler, etc., you want to make sure you include those because those are going to give you specific information for those types of emission units. In this case, I don't see anything that corresponds with green receiving units, so I'm just going to click on miscellaneous. And then it's also going to give me a subtype, so I can further define what that is for miscellaneous. But as I look through here, I don't really see green receiving. So you could pick some general categories, maybe unclassifiable. I'm going to use process vent. Okay, and one thing to note here is you can see this doesn't give us a very good description of what you're putting in as part of this project. So you want to make sure you give a good description down here, either in the comments or there's a project description where you can add some details just to tell us what the mission unit is if it isn't real specific up here. Okay, we'll put the date of installation. Mission unit ID. Again, you want to give it a name, grain receiving, and then indicate what type of unit it is. Is it a new unit, unpermitted existing unit, or is it a modification to a unit that already has a permit? If that was the case, you click on that, and then you'll want to make sure you include the current permit number for that unit. But we have a new unit, so I'll click on that, include the manufacturer model number again, and then include the maximum nameplate capacity. So in this case, the unit as a maximum can process 100 bushels per hour. So I'll go ahead and include that. You can also include a design capacity. So say the unit is designed to do 100 bushels per hour, but it's part of an overall process line that only does 80. You could include that information there. The material processed is going to be grain. And then again, if you're modifying an existing unit, you can include that modification date. And then here you can just include any comments you want that may clarify some of these points up here. Just go ahead and include any comments you want. Again, the more information, the better. And then we move down to the requested limits section. So the mission unit form is where you're going to request any limits for the process or for the project. And specifically this unit in this case. So if you don't want any limits, you could just click on no. But if you do know the limits you want, go ahead and click on yes. And that's going to bring up the different types of limits that we have. So you can request an operational hours limit. So in this case, I want to limit the unit to 2,000 hours per year to reduce the potential emissions of the unit. And then we also have categories for production limits and material usage limits. So say you wanted to limit this unit to receiving 1,000 bushels per year, you can include that here. It also has a section for emission limits. And you request those by clicking on the add new record. So in this case, I do want to request a limit for total PM. And that's going to limit PM 10 and 2.5 also. And then just put in the value you want. So in this case, I want to limit this to 3 pounds per hour. And then again, for these tables, you want to make sure you save within them, and you do that on this one by clicking the green check mark. And then again, you'll see that show up there. So that's how you know it's in the system. We have a category for other limits. So if they don't fit any of these categories above, you'd include your limit there. And then the rationale for the requested limit. So in this case, I want to limit this unit to remain a synthetic minor source for Title V and PSD. Okay, and then the next category, it's asking for a description of the process and for you to attach any process flow diagrams. So here you want to provide a good description of what the mission unit does. Provide the inputs and the output, where the emissions are going, and are they controlled, uncontrolled. Again, the more information you can give us, the more efficient our review is going to be. And it's good to include process flow diagrams too. That's something that's missing from a lot of applications. We usually end up having to ask for them, or they provide a better knowledge for us to base our decisions on. So it's good to include those. And you include those either for the mission unit itself, or maybe the production line it's in, or maybe the overall facility. Whatever you think will help us in a review, I would just go ahead and include that. Okay, so now we have all the information about the equipment in the form. We've requested our limits. Now we want to indicate whether this mission unit is being controlled by a control device. And you do that by associate control equipment. And again, your control devices will pop up. And you can see the one we just added, CE12B is there. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that and click Save. And then we also want to indicate which stack that the mission unit is going to be venting through. So we're going to click on Associate Emission Point. And again, that's an error there. It should be EP12A, but we'll click on that, click Save. Okay, then we'll save the form. And sorry about this. We've been having some problems with the production site. So that's just an error that's going to show up. but it should be okay.
In that process flow diagram, can you cut and paste? Like if you have a PDF or something, can you just cut and paste into there with the process flow diagram, or do you have to do an attachment?
No, you can provide, well, I think you could provide it there if you wanted to, or you could just attach the PDF if you wanted to.
We're going to
whatever.
show you how to, we're going to show you how to attach a document, and you'll see how easy that is to do.
Yeah, so if you're going to
Very
copy it from there, probably be maybe easier just to attach it to the application, and that'll come in step 2. Okay, so we'll move on to the next form. Okay, so now we have all of our information for the equipment in there. We want to include any emission calculations, and we do that by add new emission calculations, and you want to do that for each emission point. So this drop down box will bring up all the different units at the facility, and you just pick the one that's part of this application. It also asks for your methodology. So you're using emission factors, a mass balance, using stack test data or some other form. In this case, I'm using emission factor, so I'll click on that one. And then there's a checkbox here to say whether you're just going to include your calculations as an attachment. So if you already have your calculations done on a separate spreadsheet, you just click that box and attach it in step 2. So that should make it real easy. But I'm going to go through the process of how you would just go ahead and use Easy Air System to add your calculations. So we'll do that by add new record. Again, you want to do that pollutant by pollutant. So the first thing we'll have to do is search for a pollutant. And I'm going to do PM. And then you're just going to indicate which pollutants it is you're doing the calculation for. And I'm just going to do total PM and have that represent emissions for PM 2.5 and PM 10. So we'll save that. And then it'll bring up this table here where you can put in your information. So first thing you're going to input is your emission factor. So that is 1 pound per bushel. And then the emission factor source. So I got that information from AP42. So I'll click on that. State your control efficiency, which was 98%. And then what the actual emissions are. In that case, it comes to 1 pound per hour. And I'll put in my hourly restriction of 2,000 hours per year. And then state your potential emissions in tons, which will be 1 ton per year. So that's good. So our estimated emissions here come up to 1 pound per hour, and we requested a limit of 3 pounds per hour. So that works out. So we'll go ahead and save that. And then we'll save the form. And then your calculations are in the system. Okay, and the next form is the emission inventory form. So here you're going to provide emissions for the sources at your facility. So if you're a minor source, you have to make sure you include all emission sources at the facility. So that includes permitted sources, exempt sources, grandfathered, fugitive sources if they're required. You want to make sure you include everything. And that's so we can compare your total emissions to program thresholds such as Title V, HAP emissions, PSD. So you have to include everything. If you're already a PSD major source, you only need to include emissions from the previous 5 years for any sources that you've either added or modified. So as you come down here, you can see it's saying, do you want to just do an attachment? So if you already have your inventory worked out on a spreadsheet, you could just click yes and then attach that in step 2, which should make it pretty easy. Again, I'm just going to go through the process of how you're going to add that information. Click on your PSD classification. Are you major, minor? If you don't know, you can click unknown. That's something we'll determine during the review. And then you're going to add your emissions, both permitted or all permitted, fugitive, and exempt and grandfathered, and those are in separate categories. And the ones you need to add, you'll just go ahead and click on add new record under it. So again, you want to go through all your sources at your facility. In this case, I'm just going to go through what we just added. So click on the grain receiving unit. When you think you're going to install it or do a modification, and then the permit number. In this case, it's new, so I'm going to put to be determined since there isn't a permit number yet. And here you want to include your emissions, your potential emissions. And if there's an existing permit limit or you're requesting a permit limit, that's what your potentials are going to be. So it isn't what you estimated at the 1 ton per year. It's going to be the 3 tons per year limit that you requested. So I'm going to put 3 in there for PM, PM10, and PM 2.5. And then, so you'd have to go through all the different emission units at the facility and add those one at a time. They need to move on to fugitive emissions and adding any of those sources. And those are only required in certain instances. So, or for certain facilities. So you just want to go up here and we give a pretty good description of that. If you fall into one of those categories, then you'd have to include your fugitive emissions. And if you have any questions on that, it's kind of complicated, you can give us a call too. And then finally do your exempt and grandfathered sources. And again, you know, for permitted sources, you're going to use any permit limits that are established or you're requesting. And for everything else, you'll make an estimate based on the maximum design capacity of the unit. So for exempt units, if any standards apply, you want to use that, or just go ahead and use the calculations at the maximum design rate. So once you get all those in, you're going to click on save, and then it's going to give you facility totals here. So then you'll be able to compare those to any program thresholds to see if you'd be part of those. So right now, you do have to go through each emission unit at the facility and add them one at a time. We're hoping our future enhancement is that we'll have a button, you click on it, and that's going to fill in all your existing sources. So whatever you used on a previous application, that'll automatically fill in. You can go in and check it, make sure it's still the same, and then you would just add the new units that are part of the project. But again, the other option is to just include that as an inventory, the inventory as an attachment. So that's another source that can save you some time.
Mike, let's take a question here that we got on the chat.
Okay, go ahead.
And this is concerning the previous form where we're talking about emission calculations.
Okay.
We're getting a lot of good questions today, guys, so thank you. This comes in from Terry. Her question is, should we also upload an Excel spreadsheet that has the emission calculations in addition to completing the screen? Okay,
yeah, that's a good question. So no, if you're going to include the spreadsheet that has the calculations on it, that's all you're going to need. And that's probably going to even be more descriptive than what you'll be able to put in the Easy Air system. So if you already have those worked out, just include the attachment, and then you can skip this and just click on that box that says we're going to attach the calculations.
But you know, I think if somebody wanted to use the screen, if they maybe were concerned that there'd be questions on the source of the emission factors, do you think it would be a good idea for them to also attach like an explanation or a spreadsheet explaining a little bit more detail how the emissions were derived?
Yeah, I think that would be a better format to maybe explain the source of the emission factor or any assumptions you're making. You're kind of limited, I think, in this table. This would probably be good for basic calculations, but yeah, I think in that format you can explain things a little better too.
Yeah, we're gonna, after Mike gets through, we're gonna go through some tips here, but I think one thing to keep in mind is you should be trying to think about you know, what kind of questions that we might have on the information that you're providing. And if you think we are going to have questions, well, then you try to head us off and be upfront with it and say, well, here's where I got this emission factor from, or here's how I did my calculations. So it doesn't hurt to provide more information to support what you put on the form, on the on-screen form. Don't feel like you're confined to that, I guess.
Yeah, and step 2 with the attachments, you know, there's an opportunity to really attach anything you want to. So yeah, whatever you think is necessary for the review, I would just go ahead and attach it. Okay, do we have any other questions or?
That's all we have now. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're at the greenhouse gas emission inventory form. So here, it's kind of similar to the mission inventory form. Here you just want to include any greenhouse gases that are part of this project. So you don't have to go through everything at the facility, just what's part of this project. And give some pretty good instructions here. There are special requirements for PSD applications. So you can go through that information here, and we give a link to more information that'll help you determine what's required and how to make those calculations. So a nice feature here is if there's no greenhouse gases as part of the project, you can just click on this button here and you're done. And And again, you can include it as an emission inventory attachment. You just click on yes. But if you were going to include them here, it's just the same as emission inventory form. You're going to add a new record, find your emission point, and then include the information that you need. In this case, I have a emission unit that's only giving off PM emissions, so I don't have any greenhouse gas emissions, so I can just click on that and move to the next form. Okay, and that brings us to the modeling determination form. And you really just have one question here. It's just asking if you want to go through the determination or not. You do have an option, but I would suggest always going through this determination just to see whether modeling is required. Because if modeling is required, you're going to have to provide more information, and then you kind of know that up front. Modeling can be a little more complicated too, so that kind of prepares you for anything that might happen during the review. So I would just go ahead and click on yes. And that's going to bring up the form. And this determination is made in two steps. The first step is that we look at all the emissions that occur as part of this project. We compare it to a threshold, and if it's over that, then modeling is required. In step two, we also look at if your facility was modeled in the past, we look at what the emissions from just the facility are, and then we add that to the current background, which can change. And then we compare that to a threshold. So if it's over that threshold, which means you're close to a national standard, we're always going to model it in those cases when you're getting really close, just to make sure, a small project can put you over. So if either of those things are true, modeling will be required for that pollutant. So we'll start with step one, including the project emissions. So in this case, you want to include your potential increases. And as I mentioned, we ask for a permit limit of 3 pounds per hour. So we'll go ahead and put that in there. Now, if you had multiple units in the project, you would, of course, just sum those and put those in those 2 boxes there. If you have decreases that are happening as part of this project, so you're putting in equipment, you're taking out, you can take credit for the decreases, and you would include that there. And then you just click on calculate, and it's going to bring up the net change. And then that's compared to these thresholds when modeling is required. So you can see PM10, it's below that threshold, so modeling isn't required for that, but it is required for PM 2.5 in this step. Then we move on to the second step. And then we're going to look at what your current model concentration is. If you haven't done modeling before, this is just going to be 0, so you can put zeros in there. If it has been modeled, we use those results. And for a while now, we've been sending out a form with permits that we've issued when we've done modeling, and we tell you what the model concentration is, so you can get that information there. If you don't have that, we do provide a link here, and you can just click on that. And that's going to bring up a form on our website, and you'll just include basic information, your name and your plan ID. Click submit form. We'll gather that. We'll put together a summary form, an AR summary form for you, which will give you the model concentration and send that back to you. And then you can include that information here. So I know my model concentration is 95, 10, and 1. So I put those in and click calculate, and that's going to bring up my totals. It's going to add what's coming from my facility, what the current background is, and then it's going to compare it to the threshold. And in this case, I'm over for PM10. So in the third table, we got a summary of both steps. So it's showing that modeling is going to be required for both PM10 and PM 2.5. So if you have any questions about modeling, we do provide a number here, which you can call. Again, if you have anything about the emission rates, you can call us on our helpline. So if you need any help making this determination, don't hesitate to contact us. And then the final question is just asking who's going to do the modeling analysis. So for minor sources, we do provide some preliminary modeling. So it gives you the option of either doing it yourself or having the DNR do it. So I'm going to click to have the DNR do it. And then we have a little box that pops up here, and it's going to tell you that you're going to have to include form MI1, which is a plot plan. That's going to be part of the process because modeling is required now, and it's also suggesting an MI2 form. So that'll come up in step 2 with the attachments. It'll give you a chance to attach your plot plan and any other information you need for modeling. Okay, then Form AF, for minor sources, you don't have to do anything here. If you were a major source, you just have to include some billing contact information. And that rounds out step 1. Okay, so now we're on to step 2. This is where you're going to include your attachments. And it gives you quite a few options here. As you can see, there's a lot of them. And it's going to show you which ones are required. So if you tried to move to the next step, you wouldn't be allowed with saying, you know, either attaching them or saying you're going to mail them in. So you do have that option of attaching electronically to the application or mailing it into us or some other method. So in this case, I'm going to say I want to just attach that electronically. You'd upload that from your computer. Click on choose file and then go down and find your MI1 form. Okay, that's attached. So we'll save the form and now it's attached. So, and then it gives you, you know, there's some other required ones here. I'm just going to put mail on this just to make it the presentation go faster. But you want to make sure you include all the required forms you need to. And we do recommend doing those electronically. If they come in mail, we have to wait for them to catch up and it might delay the review. So you just, if you can, do it electronically. And then you can go through the optional ones. So, you know, like John was saying in the question asked, if there's anything else that you want to include in the review, just go ahead and do that right here. There's specific categories like the process flow diagram, or we just have another. If you have other information you want to include, click on other and upload as much as you want. So there's the emission inventory, which was an option at one step. So the MI2, which was requested. So there's a lot you can attach here to help the review process. Okay, once we get everything attached, click on next. And that brings us to step 3. So this is where a validation of the overall application is going to occur. And just going to make sure you've included everything you need to have a complete application. So, and it'll do that by indicating a green check. And it looks like we got everything included. So we don't have to go back and make any corrections at this time. Okay. And then it's going to bring you to the payment option here. So here it's going to show you what's owed, and then it's going to give you a payment method. So one thing I did want to do is just stop the application process here. And just to show you, like, so this is, you've done the application, you set it aside, and you want to come back at a later date to add another emission unit. Maybe you weren't sure at first, and now you want to add that second emission unit as part of this process. So what you do for that is you go under the submittal tab and look up and edit pending submittals. And then here it's going to list all your construction submittal application, and that's by number. So if you did want to look it up here, was an older application, you don't see it right away, you could type in the submittal ID and do a search. But here it's right on top. So I'm going to go ahead and click on edit application. Okay, so it's going to bring up the application as we left it. So all that information is still there for you. And nothing's going to change in this project, you know, with the facility information, the cover page. We're not adding another emission point. We're going to use that existing emission point to vent this new emission unit. Same with the control equipment. So really what I want to do is come down here and add another emission unit. Okay, so as before, you have the same options. I'm going to want to click add new emission unit. Since I'm adding another new unit. Indicate the emission unit type. Again, it's miscellaneous. There's not a category for hammer mills. And then the subtype comes up. Now in this case, they do list a hammer mill. So you can go ahead and click on that, and that's going to give us a much better description. So go ahead and use that. The date of installation. And this is going to be filled out in the same fashion as the other one. Put in hammer mill. Again, this is a new unit. Include the manufacturer model number, nameplate capacity. Again, this is 100 bushels per hour. Still processing grain. And then include any comments you want. And then you'll come down to the requested limits. So I requested a limit of 3 pounds per hour for that stack. So I'm not going to go ahead and change that. I'm just going to put no. I don't want any additional limits. That's already been requested, so I don't need to add that again. Again, here you want to include the process flow diagram maybe for each unit. You can include it for both units. Again, just include as much as you can. Okay, so now we have that information there. Again, we're going to want to indicate what control device it's using. And again, that's the new one we've added, so we'll click on that one. And then indicate the mission point. Okay, so we'll save the form. Okay, and then you can see that showing up there. Okay, and then we'll just want to add our mission calculations for this unit. So use that ID. Again, I'm going to use mission factors, and I'm going to do that as add a new record. And again, you do that in the same way, and I'm using the same emission factor, so that's 1 pound per bushel. Again, from AP 42, control efficiencies 98%, and that comes to 1 pound per hour again. And with the hourly restriction, it's 1 ton per year. So again, now you can see we have estimated potential calculations or estimates, 1 pound for each unit. That's still less than 3 pounds per hour that we requested. So again, that works. And again, make sure you save your information within these tables. And then save your form. Okay, and then you want to go to the emission inventory form again. You want to go ahead and add that if you need to. In this case, I used the emission point overall, and I put in the potentials, which was the emission limit, so we don't need to add anything there. The greenhouse gas emission inventory form hasn't changed. Whereas the modeling determination, so we can cruise through the second step. We don't have any additional attachments. Maybe we want to attach that new process flow diagram if we hadn't before. But we'll go ahead and move on to the next step. Again, this is overall validation, still looks good. And then we come to the payment step. So it's going to give you your overall fee for the project, and then you can click on your method payment type. I'm just going to use check here. Again, we encourage people to use electronically. So if you use a credit card or some other electronic form of payment, that works best. Otherwise, we got to wait for that check to catch up before we can start working on the application. But if you do use a check, here it gives you the information where to send that. And then you want to write on the check the submittal number or include the receipt, which I'll show you in a little bit. Click on next. Okay, then now we're to step 5. This is when you're going to actually submit the application. So you'll just want to certify that all these conditions are true. And then this is where your security questions will come in. So you want to include the security question you chose. And then your PIN, which you create when you create your account. And then you're ready to submit the application. Just go ahead and hit submit. And like I said, we have been having a little bit of problems, so this may take a little bit, so it might be a good chance to take any more questions we have.
So I guess when we're thinking about tips for Easy Air, I want to give you a first tip about trying to get a construction permit these days. And my tip for getting a construction permit these days is to use Easy Air. Paper option is still available, but it's going to take us longer because when you submit a paper application to us, it's going to go to our office. Majority of us are working at home. That application has to get entered into Easy Air, so there's going to be a delay of time. before it actually gets into the review stage. So my first tip would be to use Easy Air. But when you're
John?
doing an application, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, and just want to encourage people to take care of all, or take advantage of all the, options we have for help too. You can call the engineers on the helpline. You can call Kevin and Jason, use email. There's lots
Right.
of resources on our website. So, yeah, it might seem kind of daunting at first, but once you get that set up, I think it just makes everything easier and faster. So.
Right. We have a lot of experience now answering questions and getting people registered. So I think it's getting easier for everybody. But a couple of things to keep in mind when you're working on an application for Easy Air, you should prepare for it the same way as if you were doing an old-fashioned paper application. So in other words, you are going to probably have to gather information. You are going to have to do calculations. One thing you may have noticed is that when Mike was doing the calculations, the system does not do any auto calculation in the construction permitting application. So, you have to do those calculations. So you're going to still need a calculator. And again, if you want to support your calculations in the system with attachments, please feel free to do that, because calculations are really, that's really a critical part of the whole application, as everybody, as most of you know. Helpline is still around. We are down here in the 4th bullet. That's our 877 number. So feel free to call that. That's manned during the week, probably 8 to 5 or 8 to 4:30. And so feel free with any questions about actually filling out the forms. If you have questions about getting into Easy Air, if you have system problems, then here is the email address, and then our 2 administrators, here are their phone numbers, Kevin or Jason, and then they can help you with any software problems you're having, or even just getting registered and getting set up. One thing you won't need to send us if you do the application is you don't need to attach the an entire paper application, okay? We want to get you to submit appropriate information. So, there's certain attachments that are going to be required, but you don't have to provide the whole application as an attachment. And then finally, if you are a minor source and you're paying, you have to pay with your application. To expedite your application getting logged in, like Mike said, we'd encourage you using credit card or e-check option, because the check will take a little bit of time to get to us, and the application will be kind of held up until we get that check. All right, why don't we go to the second one, Mike, and you can take that one.
Okay. Yeah, and I think these are just some reminders from what I brought up within the application. Again, you want to write down your submittal ID so you can reference that in the future. It makes searching for it really easy. And you want to follow the wizard, allow that to help you through the process. If you just go through it step by step, I think that's going to be a big help. And then saving is really important. Again, if you're jumping between forms, you want to make sure you save any tables or forms that come up. You want to make sure you save those before you close them. So if you close them, they're not going to save it for you. But yeah, you'll see those green check marks or save buttons. So just make sure you save as much as you can. I hate for people to lose their information after they took all the time to put it in there. And then, yeah, if you have an application where you're modifying a unit, but you might not be modifying a specific form, you'll still want to include that form in the application, and just do that like I showed you by doing the include and submittal. And you can just check through it, but it makes it really easy just to include that anyways, and just make sure the information's correct. Yeah, and that's kind of the next point there. The next bullet is once you include that, just give it a quick check and make sure everything's complete and accurate. That we have had some information that wasn't either complete or was wrong, so just check that. And again, just save as much as you can so you don't lose your work.
Right. I will add on the completeness, checking forms, all forms for completeness is a lot of the data that's already in Easy Air by the time you get to it for the first time was migrated over from the slice system, and there's not there's some basic information, but it may not populate all the required fields for Easy Air. So keep that in mind. If you are modifying something that's already in Easy Air, you need to check each form to make sure that all the required information has been completed.
Mhm.
And I think we got one more. Okay, so if it's done, if the application is done by a PE, make sure that that signature document is attached. CAP is an acronym that Easy Air kind of created when you're searching to do your control efficiency, removal. You can search, you'll find this acronym CAP, and CAP just means criteria air pollutant, PM, PM10, SO2, NOx, VOC. Again, any application that you're submitting, you need to fill out a complete form for any emission point, control device, or emission unit in the application. So these are the forms that you need to fill out for the equipment that you're trying to obtain a permit for. One thing that I thought of when Michael was talking and the question was asked about, hey, I don't have a control device. Keep in mind that there are other things that can be used for control that might not actually be a control device or control equipment that you would still want to include. And an example of that would be using water as a dust suppression or sweeping, enclosures. Those are all control measures. So if you're doing anything like that or using anything like that and taking credit for it, want to take credit for it, you should include that as in the control equipment form. On the control equipment form itself, you have to list each air pollutant by the control device, and the best way to search for it is to click on the associate control pollutant, and then you can search by pollutant type.
Yeah, I think that was kind of confusing at first for me, John. So,
Right.
I wasn't sure what that meant or how to search for it. So yeah, but yeah, just for control devices, you're just telling the system what is being controlled, and then
Right.
You do the search by CAP, or if you know PM or SO2 or whatever your pollutant is, typing that in the field. So
Yep.
Somebody's confused by that, don't feel alone.
Yes, I agree. I think especially the first couple times you do it, it's a little bit of mystery, but then as you start opening things up, you'll see how that works. Okay, keep in mind when you're completing information about it on the emission unit form, we have specific forms for boilers, engines, paint booths, cooling towers. So be sure to use the specific form for those equipment, and then everything else you would use the miscellaneous form. We love flow diagrams. Flow diagrams are giving us a lot of information visually, and for anything that's a significant source, any complication to it, it's really important to attach the flow diagram. But we know that for like a natural gas boiler, emergency engine, paint booth, we know how those are laid out. So you wouldn't need necessarily to attach a flow diagram for them, but I think for basically anything else, it's really a good idea. It's really going to give us a lot of information.